And here we go with the Tory plans we talked about. The responsible British supervisory authority has given its approval to controversial plans to exploit an oil field at the bottom of the North Sea. As the North Sea Transition Authority (NSTA) announced on Wednesday, the two companies Equinor and Ithaca Energy may begin developing the Rosebank oil field northwest of the Shetland Islands. Rosebank is considered the largest undeveloped oil field in British waters. According to the companies involved, 69,000 barrels of oil per day could be produced there in the future. The authority says plans to exploit the oil field are in line with Britain's goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050, and climate activists criticized the plans as irresponsible. However, Rishi Sunak's Conservative government in London argues that the use of domestic resources is necessary to secure energy supplies during the transition to renewable energy. The Green MP in the British House of Commons, Caroline Lucas, described the decision on Wednesday as the biggest act of environmental vandalism in my lifetime. And Rosebank, this is not only the name of a famous Scottish whisky, but also a huge oil and gas field in the North Sea. The controversial mining can now begin there, a good 130 kilometers northwest of the Shetland Islands. The responsible authority, as I said, the North Sea Transition Authority, just announced this, and the British government, of course, welcomed the decision. Minister responsible for energy security and net zero, Claire Coutinho, said it made sense to use our own supplies in the North Sea. You know, that's the one that's new in the job. However, massive criticism came from the opposition and climate activists. And as I said, Rosebank is considered the largest undeveloped oil field in British waters. And the two companies, Equinor and Ithaca Energy, can now begin to work actually. And if everything goes according to plan, they will reach their 69,000 barrels per day target from 2026 until the target of a total of 300 million barrels is reached. In order for this to be successful, the companies are investing $3.8 billion. That's the equivalent of 3.6 billion euros or 3.3 billion pounds, I guess. Climate protection only plays a role in this project in one place, and that's funding. That is to be electrified, which according to Equinor will not be possible until 2030 at the earliest. British Energy Security Minister Claire Coutinho praised this, according to Reuters, and emphasized Rosebank will be less emission intensive than older oil and gas projects. It goes without saying that this project really causes horror among environmentalists. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak recently emphasized that he still sees a future for fossil fuels in his country. Oil and gas will still be part of the domestic energy mix in 2050, he said. Officially, he's sticking to the goal of making Great Britain climate neutral by 2050. But the country can afford to slow down on the way there, in his point of view. After all, they are so far ahead of other countries in the world, as he explained last week. In 2021, carbon dioxide emissions per capita were 5.15 tons. This means that Great Britain performed significantly better than Germany, where CO2 emissions per capita were 8.1 tons. But British emissions were still above the global average. In March, Carbon Brief praised the fact that coal consumption in Great Britain was falling significantly. Demand in 2022 was lower for the first time than in 1757. In contrast, emissions from petroleum rose again. Road traffic is as heavy again as it was before the corona pandemic, and air traffic has doubled compared to the previous year. However, the decline in overall emissions is due to the warm weather. They would have increased in 2022 if temperatures had not been 0.9 degrees above average, and if wind and solar energy had not also increased significantly. Ultimately, Carbon Brief's analysis notes that only a fraction of last year's emission reductions can be attributed to deliberate action. If the climate target for 2050 is to be met, emissions from buildings, transport, industry and agriculture would have to be further reduced. But Sunak shies away from this and cites social reasons. He wants to mitigate the unacceptable costs of the energy transition for British households. That's why he postponed the end of petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035. He also said he doesn't want to force any household to improve its insulation, but he wants to continue to promote heat pumps. Previous governments had committed to the net zero target without securing public support. And if they continue down this path, they say they risk losing the British population. And their backlash could be directed against the overall mission itself, in Sunak's view. And ultimately, Sunak's policies are likely to only postpone the problems into the future. According to Reuters, a climate advisor to the British government also warned about this in June. Great Britain is not doing enough to achieve its goals, and developing the Rosebank field could put the country further away from meeting its legal obligations. The decision in favor of Rosebank comes at an opportune time for British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Just a week ago, he announced his more pragmatic approach to climate policy. And Sunak not only postponed the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in Great Britain from 2030 to 2035, the ban on installing new oil and gas heaters was also postponed for several years. Sunak hopes to get out of the bottom of the polls. His Tories are currently between 15 and 20 percentage points behind Labour. In addition to postponing the end of combustion engines, Sunak's strategy to distance himself more from Labour leader Keir Starmer is also to grant new licenses to extract oil and gas. The Prime Minister believes that this will not only create new jobs, but above all strengthen national energy security. Starmer has already declared that if he wins the general election next year, he will no longer issue any new licenses for oil and gas production in order not to endanger the goal of climate neutrality. Sunak, on the other hand, can rely on the North Sea Transitions Authority's assessment that the development of the Rosebank oil field is in line with Britain's net zero target, although I don't understand that one. The companies involved also see it that way, and Ithaca Energy said on Wednesday that it wanted to ensure that emissions per barrel of oil and gas were kept as low as possible. Yeah, that they say it is clear. But I want to say it again, what Caroline Lucas said about the greatest act of environmental vandalism in my lifetime, and I have to agree with her. No one is suggesting that the taps of the oil fields be turned off immediately, but it's reckless to insist on producing more oil and gas at a time when production should actually be stopped. And Philip Evans, climate activist at Greenpeace UK, made similar comments. In his view, the Rosebank decision is nothing more than a license for fossil fuel companies to ruin the climate. Well, they are a bit excessive in what they say, but still. But there are also voices in Sunak's Conservative Party who are critical of the Prime Minister's new climate policy course. Former Business and Energy Minister Alok Sharma said he was concerned about the collapse of the political consensus in the United Kingdom on climate change. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, also a former economics minister, sees it completely differently. What a surprise. He praised Sunak for postponing the end of the combustion engine, but JRM doesn't believe in climate change anyway. At the same time, he warned the Prime Minister against introducing legal quotas for electric cars. Sunak is reportedly planning to fine car manufacturers if a certain proportion of their new cars sold are not fully electric. And they wanted to comply, but this proportion should be at least 52% in 2028 and then rise to 80% by 2030. But how if they still allow combustion engines? Well, but at least Boris Johnson's problems with nature are over for now, because Great Britain's former head of government is allowed to build his planned pool, despite objections that the project could possibly endanger local newts. I talked about this in a video some time ago. The South Oxfordshire District Council has approved the construction work subject to conditions, as the PA news agency and the British broadcaster BBC reported on Wednesday. Johnson lives with his wife Carrie and their 3 children in the listed mansion Bridewell Manor, which he purchased for several £million. An expert had raised concerns about the northern great crested newt against the plan to build a swimming pool there. Johnson then spoke out in a humorous column for the Daily Mail. Water containing chlorine is far from ideal for newts, and there appears to be a risk that they could fall into the pool, as Johnson wrote. There's just one question left to answer. Does it really exist? If it turns out that our garden is lucky enough to be home to newts, I want you to know that I will do everything I can to protect them. If we need to build small newt hotels to accommodate them on their journeys past the swimming pools, we will do that, he wrote. And that is a typical Boris Johnson again. But obviously, as it seems with the decision of the council, that he doesn't have to worry about building newt hotels anymore. But I just added this in the end of the video to give it all this serious stuff we have to talk about all the time a little bit of a fun part at least. And if you want to know more right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.